A bustling police precinct buzzes with activity as officers shuffle papers, take calls, and exchange casual banter. The air carries the usual tension of law enforcement, a mix of urgency and authority. Amid the organized chaos, a confident black woman steps through the precinct doors. Her polished appearance and calm demeanor exude professionalism and composure, setting her apart from the noise and energy around her. Dressed in a tailored suit and carrying a neat folder of documents, she approaches the reception desk to address a minor legal issue. Her tone is polite, clear, and respectful, yet her presence seems to unsettle a nearby officer. This officer, a man known for his arrogance and quick judgments, narrows his eyes as he observes her. His demeanor shifts from casual indifference to overt condescension as he decides that she doesn't belong. "What do you want here?" he sneers, his tone laced with hostility. The woman, unfazed, calmly explains her reason for being there. She's articulate and concise, but her words only seem to fuel the officer's disdain. He interrupts her, making snide remarks about how she must have wandered into the wrong place, or doesn't know how things work around here. His voice carries across the room, drawing the attention of other officers and bystanders. The woman takes a deep breath, maintaining her composure. She's no stranger to such treatment and knows that escalating the situation would only play into his hands. However, the officer doesn't relent. Sensing an audience, he raises his voice, mocking her further and questioning her intelligence and intentions. "You think you can just walk in here and make demands?" he jeers. "People like you don't get special treatment." A few officers glance over, some exchanging uncomfortable looks, while others chuckle nervously, unwilling to intervene. The tension in the room thickens as the officer continues his tirade, clearly enjoying his perceived power over her. The woman remains composed, her expression unwavering, but her silence speaks volumes. Unbeknownst to the officer, this is not a woman to be underestimated. Behind her calm exterior lies a person of significant influence and connections. Her role in a high-ranking government or legal position has placed her among the nation's most respected figures, though she chooses not to flaunt her status. As the officer's verbal abuse escalates, the woman glances at her watch and calmly retrieves her phone. Her measured response confounds the officer, who mistakes her restraint for submission. Little does he know, her allies are closer than he could imagine, and the power dynamic in the room is about to shift dramatically. The officer leans forward, a smug grin spreading across his face. "What's the matter? Cat, got your tongue?" he taunts, basking in the moment. But the woman's calm begins to unsettle those who know her reputation. A ripple of murmurs spreads through the room as a few officers recognize her and begin piecing together her identity. The tension mounts as the officer remains oblivious to the storm he's about to face. Outside, the sound of approaching vehicles signals the arrival of unexpected visitors. A convoy of sleek black SUVs pulls up, their polished exteriors gleaming under the sunlight. The precinct doors swing open, and a group of impeccably dressed men and women step inside, their presence commanding immediate attention. The room falls silent as the woman's secret allies, members of a high-level government agency or legal team, enter the scene. The officer, sensing the change in atmosphere, turns to see the newcomers. His smug expression falters as he realizes the gravity of the situation. The woman, still composed, finally breaks her silence. "You didn't ask for my name," she says, her voice steady and resolute. "Let me introduce myself." In a matter of moments, the precinct's focus shifts entirely. The officer's arrogance is replaced by fear as he grasps the weight of his mistake. The woman's poised response becomes the catalyst for a series of events that will challenge the precinct's culture and force the officer to face the consequences of his actions. The woman at the center of the storm is far more than she appears to those who meet her for the first time. A high-profile lawyer and prominent civil rights advocate, she has dedicated her career to challenging systemic inequities and holding institutions accountable. Her work has earned her accolades and a reputation as a fierce defender of justice. Yet, she remains grounded, driven by a deep commitment to her community rather than a thirst for personal recognition. Her journey has not been an easy one. Growing up in a world that often underestimated her potential, she learned to stand firm against adversity. Through sheer determination, she rose to prominence, often finding herself in rooms where her presence was met with skepticism or hostility. Despite her polished exterior, she knows all too well the subtle and overt biases that persist even at the highest levels of society. These experiences have shaped her resolve to fight for change, ensuring others don't have to endure the same struggles. Her advocacy work has made her a symbol of hope for marginalized communities. Whether arguing landmark cases in courtrooms or speaking at rallies, she exudes a rare combination of grace and authority that commands respect. Yet, her refusal to tolerate injustice often puts her in direct conflict with those who misuse power, a dynamic that she has come to navigate with precision and resolve. The officer who confronts her, by contrast, is the embodiment of unchecked authority. A veteran of the force, he has cultivated a reputation for targeting minorities and abusing his position under the guise of maintaining order. His actions are often fueled by prejudice, with a disdain for those who challenge his perceived dominance. To his colleagues, he's a figure of intimidation, someone to avoid crossing. Even those who disapprove of his behavior rarely speak up, either out of fear or indifference. Over the years, his sense of invincibility has grown, bolstered by a system that often shields officers like him from accountability. Complaints from the public are brushed aside as misunderstandings or dismissed outright, enabling his behavior to persist unchecked. He views himself as untouchable, confident that his badge grants him immunity from the consequences of his actions. This particular encounter at the precinct is not unusual for the officer. To him, the woman is just another target, an opportunity to assert his authority and reinforce his inflated sense of superiority. He thrives on the discomfort of those he harasses, using every interaction as a stage to showcase his dominance. What he doesn't realize is that this time he has picked the wrong person. As their paths cross, the stark contrast between the two becomes evident. She represents resilience and purpose, driven by a desire to uplift others and dismantle injustice. He, on the other hand, embodies the very systems of oppression she has spent her career fighting against. Their confrontation is more than a clash of personalities. It is a microcosm of the broader struggles between justice and prejudice, power and accountability. While the officer views the situation as another routine display of power, the woman sees it as an opportunity. She understands the importance of standing firm, not just for herself, but for the countless others who have faced similar treatment without the platform or resources to fight back. Little does the officer know, his assumptions and arrogance will soon lead to the unraveling of the protection he has long taken for granted. The officer wasted no time asserting his perceived dominance as the black woman walked into the precinct. From the moment she stepped through the doors, his condescending gaze tracked her every movement. Within minutes, he approached her, his tone sharp and dismissive as he asked, "What are you doing here?" The woman, dressed in a sleek suit, calmly explained her purpose, a minor legal issue she had come to address. Her measured tone and confident posture did nothing to deter the officer, who interrupted her with a mocking laugh. "You think you can just waltz in here, don't you? Dressed like you're better than everyone else." The room grew quiet, with other officers glancing up but making no move to intervene. Sensing an audience, the officer's behavior escalated. He accused her of being out of place, insinuating that her presence at the station was suspicious. She remained poised, her face unreadable, as his taunts became more pointed. "You think you're special, don't you? Let me show you how we handle people like you." Without warning, he grabbed a cup of coffee from a nearby desk and poured it over her head. Gasps rippled through the room, and a few officers shifted uncomfortably, but no one stepped forward to stop him. The woman stood frozen for a moment, coffee dripping from her immaculate hair and suit, her expression unchanging. Then, with slow deliberation, she reached for a tissue from her bag and began dabbing her face, her composure intact. "What's the matter? Got nothing to say now?" The officer jeered, emboldened by the silence of his peers. He took a step closer, invading her space as if daring her to react. But she didn't flinch. Instead, she tilted her head slightly and allowed a faint smirk to play across her lips. "Are you finished?" she asked, her voice calm and steady. The officer's smirk faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered, doubling down. "You've got a smart mouth. Let's see how you like spending some time in the holding cell." The woman, still unshaken, made a single request. "I'd like to make a phone call." "Not happening," the officer snapped, crossing his arms. "You're not going anywhere until I say so." She raised an eyebrow, her smirk deepening. "You might want to reconsider." Her quiet confidence unnerved him, but he refused to back down. "I don't take orders from you. Now sit down and stay quiet." After a few moments of persistent demands, the officer reluctantly handed her his phone, muttering, "This better be quick." She dialed a number, her tone measured and professional as she spoke. "This is her name. I'm at precinct name. There's been an incident." She paused, her gaze locking with the officer's. "I think you'll want to get here immediately." Minutes later, the sound of multiple vehicles screeching to a halt outside the station filled the air. The atmosphere in the room shifted as men and women in tailored suits and federal badges entered the precinct with swift authority. The officer's smug expression faded as one of the agents strode directly toward the woman, addressing her with the utmost respect. "Madam," her title, "are you all right?" The woman offered a small nod, motioning toward the officer who had humiliated her. "This man has been quite unprofessional." The agent turned to the officer, his voice cold. "Badge and ID now." "What's going on here?" the officer stammered, his confidence evaporating. "I was just—" "Save it," the agent interrupted. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." The room was electric with tension as other officers exchanged wide-eyed glances. The realization began to sink in. The woman wasn't just another visitor. She was someone with power and influence far beyond their understanding, and the man who had mocked and humiliated her had just made the gravest mistake of his career. The officer, now visibly trembling, tried to backtrack. It was just a misunderstanding. "No," the woman interjected, her voice sharp but calm. "It was deliberate, and it ends now." As the officer was escorted to a back room for questioning, the other agents turned their attention to the woman, ensuring her comfort and gathering evidence. The bystanders who had recorded the incident offered their footage, eager to contribute to what had become an undeniable reckoning. For the first time since the ordeal began, the woman allowed herself a small sigh of relief. Her composed exterior never wavered, but beneath it was a determination that this moment would serve as a turning point, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever faced similar treatment without the resources to fight back. The stunned precinct fell silent as the woman's true identity came to light. One of the suited officials, clearly high-ranking, stepped forward and addressed her respectfully. "Madam," her title, "are you all right? We came as quickly as possible." The room was tense as the other officers exchanged shocked glances. The cop who had humiliated her stood frozen, his arrogance replaced with a growing sense of dread. His colleagues, who had remained passive during the incident, now seemed to shrink into the background, realizing the magnitude of the unfolding situation. The woman nodded calmly. "I'm fine, but this officer's actions need immediate attention. His behavior was not only unacceptable, but emblematic of a larger issue within this precinct." One of the officials turned sharply to the cop. "Officer, you've been reported for gross misconduct. Your badge number and all details of this incident have been logged, and your actions will be thoroughly investigated. Prepare to answer for what you've done." The officer stammered, his voice shaking. "I didn't know who she was. I thought she was just—" "Stop talking," another official cut in, his tone firm. "It doesn't matter who you thought she was. What matters is how you chose to act. And based on the reports and video evidence we've already reviewed, your behavior is indefensible." Several bystanders who had recorded the incident began sharing their footage with the agents, some even offering to testify if needed. The cop's face grew pale as he realized there would be no escaping accountability this time. His history of unchecked power and misconduct had finally caught up to him. As the officials prepared to take her formal statement, the woman turned to address the room, her voice steady and resolute. "This isn't just about me. It's about the countless others who've been subjected to similar treatment without the means to fight back. I intend to ensure that this officer and anyone else involved in this kind of behavior are held accountable." The officers who had laughed earlier now looked down, avoiding her gaze. The air was thick with discomfort as the gravity of the situation settled in. The cop who had started it all tried to speak again, muttering weak apologies, but the officials silenced him with a sharp glare. Outside the precinct, the story was already gaining traction. One of the bystanders had shared the video online, and within hours it went viral. Social media erupted with outrage, with hashtags calling for justice and accountability trending nationwide. The footage showed the cop's condescending tone, his mocking actions, and the poised composure of the woman he had humiliated. Public figures, activists, and ordinary citizens alike rallied behind her, demanding change. As the spotlight turned to the precinct, reporters began digging into the cop's history. What they uncovered only fueled the firestorm. Complaints of racial profiling, verbal abuse, and misconduct filled his record, all swept under the rug by a department unwilling to address systemic issues. The public outcry grew louder, placing immense pressure on the department and its leadership. The woman, now a symbol of resilience and justice, used the attention to call for meaningful reforms. "This isn't about one bad cop," she stated during a brief press conference later that day. "This is about a system that enables and protects such behavior. That system must change." By the end of the day, the precinct announced a full internal investigation, with the cop placed on immediate suspension. The woman's influence ensured that this wasn't just a temporary measure. She made it clear that this incident would spark lasting change, not just for the precinct, but for the entire system it represented. The fallout from the incident was swift and decisive. Within days of the viral video's release, the precinct announced the immediate suspension of the officer involved. An internal investigation, expedited by the woman's powerful advocacy, revealed not only his egregious behavior during the incident, but also a history of complaints that had been ignored or dismissed. Public pressure mounted as calls for accountability echoed across social media and news outlets. Facing immense scrutiny, the police department had no choice but to terminate the officer. Their statement acknowledged the severity of his actions and pledged to implement changes to prevent such misconduct in the future. While many saw this as a victory, the woman knew that firing one officer wasn't enough. She used the moment as a catalyst for broader change. Leveraging her influence, she partnered with civil rights organizations and policymakers to push for national reforms. She called for mandatory anti-bias training, de-escalation techniques, and stronger oversight of police departments nationwide. Her efforts ignited a movement, with activists and community leaders rallying around her vision. Protests turned into policy discussions, and her voice became a cornerstone of the fight for systemic justice. Meanwhile, the precinct itself underwent a transformation. Under her guidance, it introduced mandatory diversity and sensitivity training for all officers, and established a community oversight board to ensure accountability. The changes were welcomed by local residents, who had long been wary of law enforcement. Slowly, trust began to rebuild. For the woman, the personal impact was profound. Her composure and determination during the ordeal earned her widespread admiration. Messages of support poured in from around the world, recognizing her as a beacon of strength and resilience. She became a prominent figure in the national conversation about racial justice, invited to speak at conferences and collaborate with organizations working toward equity. Despite the accolades, she remained grounded, focusing on her mission rather than her newfound fame. The incident solidified her resolve to dismantle systemic injustice, one precinct and policy at a time. She worked tirelessly, channeling her experience into actionable change that would benefit future generations. Her story inspired countless others to stand up against discrimination. Communities that had been silenced by fear found their voices, pushing for accountability and reform in their own regions. Her advocacy not only addressed individual misconduct, but also highlighted the structural issues that allowed such behavior to persist. The cop who had underestimated her paid the ultimate professional price, his career in law enforcement over. He became a cautionary tale of arrogance and unchecked bias, a symbol of what the system could no longer tolerate. His dismissal sent a powerful message. The days of impunity were numbered. The woman's work was far from over, but the incident marked a turning point, not just for her, but for the countless others who had endured similar injustices. Through her resilience, she proved that even in the face of prejudice, dignity and determination could pave the way for lasting change. The culmination of the incident became a watershed moment for justice and reform. At a national conference on police accountability, the woman stood before a packed audience, her presence commanding respect and admiration. The room was silent as she began to speak, her voice calm but firm, carrying the weight of her lived experience and the hopes of countless others who had faced similar injustices. "This isn't just about one officer or one precinct," she began. "It's about a system that has too often failed to hold itself accountable. Change isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. Respect is not optional, it's mandatory. Her words reverberated through the hall, met with a standing ovation. The attendees, a mix of policymakers, activists, and community leaders, were galvanized by her call to action. She outlined a vision for systemic reform. Independent oversight committees, mandatory de-escalation training, and a commitment to rebuilding trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve. Meanwhile, in a small, dimly lit room, the disgraced officer watched the broadcast of her speech. The glow of the television illuminated his face, etched with regret and realization. He had lost not only his job but also his reputation and standing in the community. The weight of his actions, now immortalized in a viral video and national headlines, was inescapable. The consequences of his prejudice served as a stark reminder of the growing intolerance for misconduct and discrimination. As the woman left the stage, she was met by reporters eager to capture her thoughts on the progress being made. "This is just the beginning," she said with a determined smile. "True justice requires vigilance, persistence, and the courage to confront what's uncomfortable." Her journey didn't end there. She continued her work tirelessly, advocating for legislation that would standardize police accountability measures across the country. Her leadership inspired grassroots movements, empowering communities to demand better from those sworn to protect and serve. The final scene returned to the precinct where the incident began. The woman, accompanied by her allies and supporters, walked out with her head held high, her presence a symbol of resilience and triumph. Officers who had once laughed nervously at the cops' antics now stood silent, their expressions a mix of respect and realization. As she stepped into the sunlight, the air was filled with a sense of closure, not just for her, but for everyone who had witnessed her unwavering stand for justice. Her parting words lingered, a final reminder to those around her. Respect is not optional, it's mandatory. Her actions had set a new standard, proving that dignity and courage could dismantle even the most entrenched systems of prejudice. The impact of her resolve rippled far beyond that precinct, sparking a movement that would resonate for years to come.